Family. You know them, you might love them, or you might hate them. But through it all, they're a part of your life. There's a saying that everyone knows. You can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. It rings true for many. Some families are fractured beyond repair, bound by dysfunction and conflict. Others are warm, tight-knit, and built on love, like the Steenkamps, a seemingly perfect farming family living on the outskirts of the quiet town of Griekwastad in South Africa's Northern Cape. But on Good Friday 2012, the illusion shattered. That night, a monster revealed itself within the family, and the life they had spent years building began to crack beyond recognition. This is CrimeBrew with Kgosi Tau-Bantsi. Welcome to the third episode of CrimeBrew, Botswana's very first true crime podcast. I'm Kgosi Tau-Bantsi, and welcome back. I hope you're having a good March. Mine has been one from hell. I don't want to bother you with too much information at the moment, but it's been long, like very, very long for me at least. At least it's my birthday month, so yay. I guess like I turned 20 a week ago. So the whole process for me has been quite slow. I don't expect, being 20 to just quicken anytime soon. But hey, let a race around the sun, and in a way, I'm kind of looking forward to it. My 20s, a whole new decade, a whole new load of responsibilities. Like, soon I'm going to be a taxpayer. That's crazy. But you got to go through them. Anyway, today I'm covering a very big case. So big that it will consist of 2 parts. Yes, 2 episodes covering this case, which is the Griekwastad murders of 2012. This case is just one of the craziest and settingly unique cases that I can remember in recent memory. Like, it's got all the hallmarks of a thriller, because to say that the family I'm covering was perfect, I'm talking perfect, like sitcom perfect. However, one person's dark thoughts left so much tragedy in its wake, and the judicial outcome of this case in part 2 is going to make you lose your shit. Like, genuinely, it is going to make you lose your shit. If you haven't, please subscribe to CrimeBrew on Spotify and YouTube, follow CrimeBrew on Instagram, and follow the brand spanking new TikTok page. Yes, finally, we're on TikTok now, at CrimeBrew_BW. With that said, I hope you have your cups of tea ready, and let's begin brewing the case of the Griekwastad murders. Our sources for today's episode include various articles from The Mail and Guardian, News 24, and Sunday Times. There's also True Crime South Africa's episode on the murders, so check the episode out on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. There's 2 other podcasts that have also covered this case as well, Truly Criminal and The Casual Criminalist, so also check them out on the same platforms. There's also a book on this case. Yes, you heard me correct. There is actually a whole book written on this. It's called The Griekwastad Murders, The Crime That Shook South Africa. And it's written by this guy called Jacques Steenkamp. So he's a journalist. He's investigated this case heavily from its early days right up until its conclusion. And he is absolutely in no way possible related to the family of today's case. He's not related to any of them at all. The reason being is that Steenkamp is a pretty popular South African surname. So, if you thought that this book was written by someone in the Steenkamp family, you'd be wrong. It's just someone who supposedly has the surname Steenkamp. So, yeah, just wanted to make that clear. And there's also a movie based on this case as well. Yes, you heard me correctly. There is a movie based on today's case called Griekwastad, which you can find on Showmax with English subtitles. Yippee! Woo! Yay! So you can just be able to watch the movie at your own time. It's like, I think, an hour, 30 minutes to 2 hours long. I'm not really too sure. But anyway. Speaking of Showmax, remember Kgosi Tau-Bantsi drama? The docuseries that covered the real war mourned case of 1996? You remember when I mentioned that specific episode in the very first episode of CrimeBrew back in January? They also covered this case too on its third episode of its first season on Showmax. And so also just keep in mind that this episode, and really the whole series, has no English subtitles at all, and is mainly in Afrikaans. So if you want to try out your knowledge of Afrikaans confidently by watching and listening to this episode, go ahead, go be my guest. Just try it. You never know. Now keep in mind that in today's case, there is a lot of names to keep track of. So I suggest that you listen carefully. The main key players in today's case are the Steenkamp family, which consists of Dion Steenkamp, the 44-year-old patriarch of the family, Dion's 43-year-old wife, Christel Steenkamp, or Christel, Christel. Dion and Christel's eldest and only son, 15-year-old Don Steenkamp, and Dion and Christel's 14-year-old youngest and only daughter, Martella. Other members of the Steenkamp family will be revealed as the episode and really the case progresses. We've also got the Steenkamp family friend, Benny Hickrut. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Benny Hickrut. Afrikaans surnames. Why are they so complicated sometimes? Benny Hickrut. I hope, for the love of God, I pronounced that correctly. So yeah, Benny Hickrut and his wife, Hanli Hickrut. They're also part of today's key players. And finally, there is Brigadier Colonel Dirk de Waal. What a surname. Dirk de Waal. So he's the lead detective who's assigned to this case, and he investigates it, and my gosh, what he discovers is absolutely crazy. So he's also part of today's key players as well. So the majority of the events of today's case took place in the small farming town of Griekwastad, which is situated in the Northern Cape province in South Africa. Now, out of South Africa's 9 provinces, the Northern Cape is its largest by size. But it's also South Africa's most densely populated province, as there are about 1.3 million people currently living in the province as of 2022. That number may have increased, it may have decreased, but it's roughly within like the 1 million bracket. So not a lot of people live in the Northern Cape. And when I was doing research on Griekwastad, I was amazed by the history that the small town particularly has. Because you think, it's just a small town, nothing much really goes on. You'd be wrong. It was founded in 1805 by 2 London Missionary Society missionaries. And it was originally called Gurkha Town. And the missionaries and their families, they lived amongst a group of colored tribes descending from the Khoikhoi and the Karigukwa. Whatever. Karigukwa tribes. Why did I spend so much time trying to pronounce it? I sound like Steve Harvey trying to pronounce a name Katswana on Family Feud Botswana. Anyway, so originally Griekwastad was called Gurkha Town by the London Missionary Society missionaries that founded the town in 1805. And nearly 70 years later, in 1873, Griekwastad became the capital of the British colony Gurkhaland West. So it was its own separate colony from the Cape Colony, the one that was owned by John Rhodes, the guy who wanted to build the longest trail track in Africa from Cape Town to Cairo, that whole thing, blah, 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 blah. So between 1873 to 1880, British colony Gurkhaland West was its own province. And I wouldn't really say province in this case, because they acted more like a country within a country, or more or less a colony within a colony, than it was like a province or blah blah blah. Like, I mean it in a way whereby the British colony Griqualand West, had its own currency, they had its own flag, they had its own style of government. So that's why it's more or less a colony within a colony. But in 1880, the province or colony, whatever, it became absorbed by the larger Cape Colony, and thus British colony Griqualand West was no more. However, Griekwastad lived to survive another day. And even though to this day Griekwastad is still sometimes called Griqualand, it's known in the Northern Cape for people that want to find semi-precious stones. Two examples being Tiger's Eye and Jasper. Like, you'll find pictures online. They're really, really beautiful stones, really interesting patterns, really interesting colors, and etc. So, yeah, those are some very, when you look them up, those are some of, the most genuinely beautiful stones you'll ever find anywhere. So, yeah. As it was a small farming town of about 6,000 people, obviously everyone knew each other. And I mean, everybody knew each other. They knew their families, they knew their aunts and uncles, they knew their friends, they knew their acquaintances, they knew their nieces and nephews. Everybody knew everybody, more or less, yeah. And obviously, the Steenkamps were no exception, as they were well known in Griekwastad as the perfect family. Let me reiterate, the Steenkamps were known throughout Griekwastad as the perfect family. Dion Steenkamp was born on the 28th of January 1968 to Don Sr. and Betty Steenkamp, and he was the youngest of 3 children, the eldest siblings being his older sisters, Elbeth and Mariana. Dion was something of a late miracle child, because Betty survived 2 miscarriages prior to carrying Dion, and gave birth to him at the age of 42. Good Lord. Suffering 2 miscarriages and later giving birth to your son at the age of 42. That's just remarkable. Hey man, big ups to Betty. Big ups to Betty. That boom suffered. But she was like, nah, I ain't gonna let that suffering get to me. I'm Betty Steenkamp. I'm gonna give birth to Dion by God's good grace. Yeah, that was a really lame joke. Anyway, sorry, kind of deviated for a bit. Dion was 11 years younger than Elbeth, and he was also 8 years younger than Mariana, and thus his parents doted on him as much as they did with the other 2 daughters. Now, Dion was born and raised in a Nahuik farm situated outside Griekwastad, which his father owned at the time. And as a result, Dion developed a love for farming and the outdoors from a very young age. Plus, the Steenkamps owned several farms in and out of Griekwastad, so it wasn't just the Nahuik farm. So Dion from a young age was poised to one day take over running all of these farms that his family owns. And according to Dion's childhood, adolescence, and young adult life in etc., not too much is known, but from what I've gathered, Dion was one quite sporty guy. You see, he played rugby during his school years, and he played the position of lock, which is basically like the rugby version of a centre-back in football. Because if there's one thing about Dion, this man was tall. He was tall, and he was very big. Like, I'm talking 6'3" tall, 140 kgs big. This man wore 5XL shirts. And this man could just easily make you pee your pants the minute you see him. So that should give you a pretty clear indicator about how large this man was. Like, he was the living epitome of intimidating. Now, there was another sport that Dion would later become involved with, and it was this equestrian sport called tent pegging. Now, you're probably wondering, what the hell is tent pegging? Well, I texted a good friend of mine about this. So she's heavily involved in equestrian sports herself. And I asked her the very same question. What the hell is tent pegging? And what she told me was that it's basically a horseback sport in which riders use a lance, which looks like a small little javelin, or a sword to pick up small targets up from the ground while galloping the horse at full speed. Basically, the equestrian version of ring tossing, where instead of tossing rings, you pick them up with a stick on a horse with the speed of a Bugatti. Like, try to comprehend all of that. That's just absolutely mal. And people do it, and the adrenaline. I can imagine that. I can imagine that the adrenaline for the sport was probably just like really high. Like, I know I'll die doing this shit because I'm just too skinny for it. Like, there's no way I can ever trust myself going on a horse, riding on it, and doing the sport confidently. I am gonna fall off and break my back. Anyway, this was a sport, which has been around since the 4th century. So it's old, it's got history. And it somehow got a following in South Africa, which included Dion. And in his young adult years, Dion also studied computer science and mathematics at the University of Free State's Bloemfontein campus. And he would meet communication student Christel Masson. Now, Christel was born on the 11th of May, 1968 in the Eastern Cape. Now, not much is known about her, just like Dion in this case, in terms of the childhood and, young life. But what we do know was that she was raised on a farm in the Eastern Cape, like Dion was in the Northern Cape. And Dion and Christel, they shared a love for farming. And it was this love for farming and the fact that they've got quite a lot in common that made their relationship turn romantic. Dion and Christel, they get married on the 20th of May, 1991 in Bloemfontein. And you remember Betty, Dion's mom? You see, she made Christel's wedding dress. Like, hey man, what a wonderful mother-in-law. Making your own wedding dress, to wear and cherish forever. Wow. So after the wedding, the couple moved to Griekwastad full time. As Dion began helping his father with the farm work at Nauk because his father was becoming older. That's going to become quite important later on. So Dion's father was getting older. He wasn't really fit to run every single farm as much as he used to. So Dion coming in with his wife to help him out really did help his father out a lot. And Christel, she assimilated herself into life on the Nauk farm pretty easily. Because don't forget, she is a farm girl at heart. That's why. The couple would soon welcome their 2 children into the world. Don on the 18th of August 1996 and Martella on the 11th of December 1997. Eventually, Dion took over running the Nauk farm and other farms under the Steenkamp's vast farming property. And his family was now firmly established in Griekwastad. So, Dion and Christel, they were quite well known in Griekwastad for their down-to-earth, modest personalities despite their wealth. They were active participants in the town's Dutch Reformers Church community. Dion was known to farm sheep, specifically at the Nauk farm. And remember his interest in tent pegging? He would eventually become the national level coach for the under-18 boys and girls national tent pegging team. Like, when I say this sport got a really good following, I mean national level following. So Dion coached the under-18 boys and girls national tent pegging team. And he wasn't doing it alone. He was also doing it alongside a very good family friend of his, Benny Hekruet, who's going to become very significant to this case. So keep in mind that. Christel put a communications degree to very good use. She became a freelance journalist for this Afrikaans provincial newspaper called Volksblad. Yet again, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Volksblad. And despite Dion's really big, intimidating size, Dion was described as a gentle giant who simply loved his family, never met a stranger, and made no enemies. Plus, he loved to joke around and prank others. And he was very beloved in his community. And his wife, Christelle, was just as beloved, because don't forget, she's a freelance journalist. And with the journalist gig that she often does part-time, she would make sure that her children would get exposed to the media from like a young age. So she would write articles on them and etc. So she wanted to make sure that Dion and Christelle got the much needed exposure for the sport and for literally every other aspect of their lives, you know. Christelle, as I said, was just as beloved as her husband. She was described as a loving, caring mother who had a quicker temper than Dion, her husband, but she was still well liked in the community. Plus, Christelle had also established her own baking business called Scrumtilicious prior to the events of today's case. Running it from a home in Norwalk, the business skyrocketed in popularity very quickly because everybody around Griekwastad knew how Scrumtilicious his signature biscuits were. See the pun I just did there? Everybody knew how Scrumtilicious his signature biscuits were. Okay, I kind of feel like I overdid it. Oh well. Oh well. So, anyway, now we're going to turn to their children. Because you see, Dion and Christelle wanted the absolute best for Don and Martella. And they doted on them a lot. They sent them to private boarding schools in the Free State, with Don going to Grey College. Now, Grey College is one of South Africa's most prominent boys' boarding schools ever. It's situated in Bloemfontein, and it's got a long list of alumni, ranging from a long list of Springbok players to athletes, and even Lawrence van der Post. Now, you're probably wondering, who the hell is Lawrence van der Post? Well, Lawrence van der Post was a writer. He was also a conservatist, basically a nature advocate, an activist, and he's a good friend to guess who? King Charles II. Yes, you heard me correctly. You know, Charles II. You know, Diana's ex, King of England, that guy. You know, Elizabeth's oldest, that guy. Like, Lawrence van der Post and King Charles II were very good friends. So good, so much of like really good friends to the point whereby Lawrence was named as the godfather to Prince William. That's how good the friendship is. Like, the guy is dead now, but hey man, a South African being named godfather to the future King of England? Hey man. Now, other notable alumni from Grey College included Wade van Niekerk, one of the world's fastest Olympic 400-meter runners and winners. Bram Fischer, who advocated for Nelson Mandela during the Rivonia trials of 1963 to 1964, where Mandela, OR Tambo, and other MK soldiers were arrested, tried, and sent to prison for, protesting against apartheid. And Steve Hofmeyr, one of South Africa's most controversial Afrikaans singers of all time. Like, if you look up Steve Hofmeyr, there's so much controversy in almost every single article written about this man. So, yeah, to say that Don went to a very top-notch school was an understatement. Martella also went to quite a top-notch school as well. Orang High School, one of South Africa's oldest girl private boarding schools, which is also situated in Bloemfontein. And they place very significant emphasis on Christian values and sport. I've checked out the school's Facebook page, and these girls are out there with hockey sticks, tennis rackets, and netball balls galore. The school wasn't lying when they said they placed the emphasis on sports, their sports. Because your Afrikaner schools sure love their sports. Like, Like, it reminds me of this one time where another friend of mine, the same one who told me about the tent pegging thing, she told me about this one time where she went to Xeris. I think it was Xeris or somewhere. I don't know. But she went to watch this under 14 rugby game, and she told me that the entirety of under 14 rugby players on the field did not look 14 years old at all. They looked far older than that. And I was just like, what is it these guys eat every single day? Because how the hell do you get strong and buff at the age of 14? Hey. Anyway, sorry. So despite being at boarding schools, Dion and Christelle will drive over 300 kilometers from Bloemfontein to Griekwastad to pick up both Dawn and Marfella from their respective boarding schools and take them back to Griekwastad to spend the weekend with their children before driving back to Bloemfontein to drop them off for the week. And as someone who used to undergo all of this between Gaborone and Ramotswa in his past, I get it. You miss your family, you want to see how they're doing and etc. But 300 kilometers to and from Bloemfontein. That's basically like spending the whole day on the road. Anyway, Dion would also get his kids, both of them, heavily involved in tent pegging. In fact, Don and Martella were both set to represent South Africa at an international tent pegging competition in late April, in which 4 Australians will be coming in and facing off against them in their respective under 18 boys and under 18 girls teams. So, as I also said, Christelle also ensured that Don and Martella got the exposure they needed by including them in her articles at Volksblad. So, in conclusion, Dion and Christelle loved their kids. Now, Don and Martella, right? Let's now discuss them. Yay! So Don and Marfella, despite the very close age difference, like they had a whole year separating the both of them, a year and a couple of months. Don and Martella had very different personalities. Don was the shy, quiet, and reserved sibling who, like his father, loved farming and hunting with his dad like every other Afrikaner boy, alongside joking around with those that he felt comfortable with. Don loved farming so much that he was willing to give up his education at Grey College and farm full-time with his dad while also going to like a nearby school. Because you see, he didn't feel like he was the most academically gifted student in the world, especially at Grey College. Like, he was smart, but just not high achieving distinctions results smart. However, Dion was like, Nah, you ain't dropping out. You aren't gonna drop out, son. Nah, you are not leaving Grey College. You're gonna get your education, get it all sorted out, go to uni, and then you're gonna come back, and once you've got your degree, that's only when you can take over the farm. That's all I gotta say, right? And despite Dion's very playful demeanor, Dion was a firm but fair parent alongside his wife. They both believed in the importance of their children getting their education first before they could take over the family farms, because education is the key to success. Plus, Dion and Christelle valued family time, since they never see their children daily. And when Don wanted to go on a trip to the coast to spend Christmas with his friend's family during the Christmas 2011 holidays, Dion refused to let Don go, because it was non-negotiable family time around Christmas. So Don was upset at first, but he seemingly let it go. Now, Martella on the other hand, didn't share the same personality as her older brother. She was known for being very extroverted. She was described as a girl with a bright future ahead of her. She was very intelligent, well-mannered, athletic, due to her tent pegging competitions, and was also very beautiful too. She was participating in beauty competitions on the side, and many thought that due to her instantly recognizable smile, she was, quote-unquote, a beauty queen in the making, according to the book. Her friends and family adored Martella, especially her dad, as she was daddy's little princess, while Dion was a mummy's boy. Now, Matela and Dion's favorite pastimes included tent pegging, obviously, riding their horses, and watching their favorite TV shows together. Whereas Dion's relationship with Don can be turbulent at times, his relationship with Matela was anything but, because they shared a very close bond. You're probably thinking, how did this affect Don and Matela? You're probably thinking, how did all of this affect Don and Matela's sibling relationship with each other? Well, they were described as having like a very normal sibling relationship, with nothing out of the blue. Therefore, each member of the Steenkamp family in Narwik seemed to form the perfect family. But the events of Good Friday 2012 proved to be anything but good. On Friday the 6th of April 2012, which was Good Friday, the Steenkamps did what every other resident in Griekwastad did, going to church to mourn the death of Jesus Christ. After the church service, the Steenkamps went back to their farm to spend the rest of the day together, as it was a public holiday. The Steenkamps' night was quiet for the rest of the night. Or so they thought. At 7 p.m, the Griekwastad police station was dead quiet, as its residents were either at 3 places at this time: their homes, one of Griekwastad's 2 bars drinking the night away, or hunting game in their farms with family and friends drunkenly. Don't drink and drive. And shoot. Do not. Therefore, nothing too interesting happened in the police station, as there were 2 police officers just doing their job, they were on duty at the police station. Then, a white Isuzu Baki, a pickup truck basically, hurriedly pulled up to the police station and outstepped a 15-year-old boy who had a look of shock on his face. He ran inside the police station. He knelt down on his knees and screamed, "You must come! They've been shot! They're all dead!" The boy in question was wearing a t-shirt and black rugby shorts, but was covered in blood from top to bottom all over his body. The cops on duty were like, "What the fuck is going on?" Right? That's when they realized, hang on a minute, we know this boy. The boy covered in blood was Don Steenkamp, the eldest son of Dion and Christelle Steenkamp. The story Don told the cops was crazy and tragic. According to police statements Don made, he was in his family's barn while the rest of his family were in the single-story home meters away watching TV. Like, you're probably thinking, okay, if the Steenkamps are so rich, why are they living in a single-story house? They're modest. They may be wealthy, but they're modest people. They aren't out there, 2-story farmhouses that look like mansions. Nah, they ain't those guys. So anyway, he was far away from his family. His family was in the house. He was in the family barn. While he was looking after his family's knives and other weapons, he heard a gunshot. He didn't think too much of it, given that he lives on a farm, so he thought, it was just someone else shooting some game nearby. However, he soon hears more gunshots alongside screams he heard nearby his home. Instinctively, he hid in the family barn and waited until the gunshots subsided. Once it was over, he crept back into his house and discovered one of the most horrific scenes no child should ever see. Inside, he saw the dead, blood-soaked bodies of his parents. His father, face down in the living room, with blood spilling out of his large body, his hands covering his chest, all while wearing blue rugby shorts and a navy blue rugby shirt written South Africa. Christelle and Matela were in the open-plan kitchen adjacent to the living room. Christelle was face down on the floor with her face facing her daughter's feet. Matela was also shot, just like her parents, and was also beaten severely. Despite this, she barely survived. Like she was clinging on to dear life. And Don rushed to her side. He cradled his sister, who was slowly losing life because, she just got shot. They looked at each other in the eyes, and Matela told her brother, I love you, before taking her last breath. After watching his sister die in his arms, Don runs to the nearest house which some of the family's farm workers lived in to tell them the news in a hurry. He soon got on his father's Isuzu and drove down the family farm at Nawa. He drove from the family's farm at Nawa to the police station to report everything he witnessed. Now, as the cops on duty listened to Don's story, they couldn't help but feel sorry for him. This kid lost his parents and younger sister all in one fortnight, and he was in clear, visible shock. There wasn't even a single tear falling from his face due to the shock. However, that could be suspicious because despite the shock, Don remained somewhat calm, which really isn't the type of behavior anyone would exhibit when they just realized the entire family got killed and you're the only survivor. Like, you'd be out there wailing, why are they dead? Why are they dead? It should have been me. I should have died with them. None of that happened. Despite this, the police resolved to assist Don. They weren't the only group of people there to assist him. Across the street from the police station was a restaurant managed by this woman called Henriette Truta, who saw the commotion at the police station in the distance. She was a relative newcomer to Griekwastad, but she noticed that something was going on across the street because, she was witnessing Don, falling on his knees and screaming out loud that they're all dead. So she prepared some cold sugar water. She walked to the police station to give the cold sugar water to Don and offer some comfort as the police started to round up their nearby personnel. Truta found Don at the back of the police station wearing nothing but shorts. And guess what he was doing? Any takers? Going once, twice? The answer? He was cleaning the blood off himself. Which, mind you, that is making you already suspicious. Plus, that's the first big fuck up the police made by allowing the supposed survivor, to clean up the blood of his murdered family members off him before doing any forensic work on him, like immediately, or testing for gun residue and blah, 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 blah. That's CSI 101. And they didn't even do that. Anyway, Henriette asked what he was doing, to which she said, "It's my sister's blood. She died in my arms, auntie," according to the book. And he said this in a very disgusted, almost repulsed tone. And I'm probably sure your suspicions are rising right now, because how can you say that about your sister's blood? Like, bruv, earlier you were there. I held my sister in my arms and she told me she loved me and she died afterwards. Now you're like, I'm washing off my sister's blood off my body because it's disgusting and it's repulsive to me. What? I get it. Unless you like gore or medicine, nobody likes the sight of blood. But Don's already making himself very suspicious. Anyway, a few police officers escorted Don to the back of the buggy he drove in. And Don showed them the two guns that were presumably used to commit the murder. A .22 rifle and a .357 Magnum revolver, which both belonged to his dad. Don told the police officers that he saw both of these guns laying around the farmhouse as he was driving past the gate on his way to the police station. Don thought it was strange since these guns were kept in his dad's safe most of the time, and assumed that they were both used to kill his parents and sister. Therefore, he decided, you know what, I'm going to have to just take both guns with me to the police station. The police, however, didn't seize both guns immediately, which is another big fuck up if you ask me. But, oh well, at least they got it, but not on time. Anyway, as the police were preparing to head to Nauk to cordon off the crime scene and begin the investigation, Don wanted to go with them. But Henry was like, nah, no, stay behind, calm down, and just let the police do their job. So Don, Henriette, and the two police officers on duty at the police station were all left behind, while the rest of the police left. And according to Jacques Steenkamp's book, Don was at Henriette's restaurant, and despite drinking the sugar water she gave him, it did little to ease his emotions. Because Don was asking Henriette several times what she thinks he should do next. And he was there. He told Henriette truth that he feels lost without his family, and how could he move on without them? And remember when I said that Truth was a newcomer to Griekwastad? Well, she obviously didn't know the Steenkamps very well, so she called the owner of the restaurant that she manages, and the owner knew the family very well. So he or she was shocked upon hearing of the tragedy that befell the Steenkamps. Soon, the owner called those he knew, and before you know it, word already spread about the deaths of Dion, Christel, and Martella Steenkamp. The police soon made it to the Steenkamps' Nauwek farm, where they were joined by other police officers. One of those police officers was Brigadier Colonel Dirk Diwal. I'm never gonna have so much fun with another surname like Diwal ever again. Anyway, Diwal is one of the Northern Cape's top cops. So, having worked for the SAPS for over 3 decades, including being the head of the Northern Cape Organized Crime Unit for 15 years at the time that the case took place, Diwal is no stranger to crimes such as these murders. What he didn't know at the time was that this particular case would be the big one. The biggest and most media-laden case he would ever work on in his career. He arrived at Nauwek from Kimberley at 9 p.m. after driving 150 kilometers and got to work with the police very quickly. And it quickly befell on Diwal and the police officers that this was no ordinary massacre. Initially, police believed that the Steenkamps may have been the victims of a farm attack gone wrong. Farm attacks are quite commonplace in southern African countries. Perpetrators guilty of the crime would raid the victims' farms, steal their cattle or machinery, and in some cases involving farm attacks, murders of innocent victims would occur in the heat of the moment, albeit seldom. However, when the police looked at the crime scene, they came to realize that their theory could be further from the truth. Due to the extensive amount of blood, it soon dawned on the police officers that this crime was personal. And to add to that, nothing in the house that was valuable, or rather, nothing in the house, nothing at all, was stolen. It wasn't a disarray, but nothing valuable or really invaluable was taken. And one other aspect of farm attacks was that dogs that lived on the farmland would bark loudly at intruders, and I mean very loudly at intruders entering their farm, leading to some perpetrators either poisoning or shooting these dogs. Nothing of that sort happened, as witnesses, which included the farm workers and the neighbors living in neighboring farms, reported to the police that they heard no barking at all from the Steenkamp's dogs. And they had 4 dogs. They had a Jack Russell, they had 3 Border Collies. So obviously, that was also another key discrepancy in the theory that they just developed. Upon closer inspection of the bodies, the police also noted that while Dion and Christel had only gotten shot, and in Dion's case, he got blunt force trauma to his head, possibly from the heel of the gun, Martella received a significant amount of injuries that didn't just amount to the gunshots on her body, as she was beaten grievously with an object on her head and the rest of her body. Therefore, the police quickly theorized that the murderer would be someone that the dogs and the Steenkamps knew very well, and had particular anger towards Martella especially. And Diwal and a few other police officers, they made their way into Griekwastad to question Don, who was still in the restaurant with the two police officers that took Don's initial statement, and Harriet Truter, the manager of that restaurant. Now, Don called his uncle, Andries Steenkamp, who lived outside Griekwastad on another farm with his family. And he also called his grandparents, Don Sr. and Betty. Yo. And he told everybody that he called the tragic news. Well, at the same time, he also asked Truter if he should tell his friends, or at least his best friends, about the murders. Now, that caught Truter off guard, because according to the book, she told him that, listen, the whole world doesn't have to know about the murders just yet. But still, it caught her off guard, and it's something that slightly insulted her a bit, because you don't have to tell everybody that your parents and your sister just got killed immediately. Just tell, immediate family members, So, yeah. Another thing Truter noticed which unsettled her was how Don remained stone cold calm to the devastating chaos that was surrounding his family's murders. While men, much older than Don, cried upon hearing of Dion, Christelle, and Matela's deaths, Don remained calm, perhaps too calm, and thus it made her a bit uneasy, really, as a result. Maybe he hasn't properly come to terms with his parents' death, yet due to his reserved nature or something more sinister, we don't know, right? We don't know what's bubbling underneath his emotions. Regardless, the entire community learned of the Steenkamp murders, and they made their way to Truter's restaurant to offer their condolences, to comfort Don, who was now the sole survivor of this tragedy. And when Diwal and his police envoy arrived at the restaurant, they spoke to the two police officers present, and they asked, "Did you take pictures of Don when he arrived in the police station?" And the officers were like, "Nah, we didn't. There was blood all over his body, but he washed it off before we could even get the chance to take photos of him. So we only took photos of him when it was, when he was clean." So, yeah, the police didn't do their job properly, eh? However, they did tell him that when Don arrived, not only did they notice the blood on his clothes, they also noticed scratch marks on his neck, and the rugby shirt that Don was wearing when he got in was slightly torn by its collar. And that's going to be very significant information later, so please do keep that in mind. Now, Diwal met Don for the first time, who was now alongside his uncle Andries, or Belech, as he was known affectionately. So we'll just call Andries Belech throughout the rest of the case. Diwal asked Belech if he could take Don to the police station to take an official statement and question him about the recent events. And although he was hesitant at first, Belech agreed to let Don be in the custody of the police. And upon getting there, Don tested for gun residue on his hands and also DNA samples taken off his fingernails as well. Don told Diwal the same story he told everyone else. And Don was given a fresh set of clothes, and the police collected his torn rugby shirt, which was outside the police station where he washed himself off, and his blood-soaked rugby shorts as evidence, and he was let go to his family, who now had the very tough task of organizing 3 funerals at the same time. Now, when news of these murders broke to the media in South Africa, the entire country went into an enthralled meltdown upon hearing what happened to the Steenkamps. And many theories, they started to fly about who could have murdered this family. Many believe that it was racially motivated, possibly done by black people, because South Africa markets the idea of the Rainbow Nation. Everyone's getting along now since apartheid. But we all know that they don't practice it entirely, because the effects of apartheid were still felt nearly 2 decades later after its fall. Many also blamed the ANC government under President Jacob Zuma at the time, as the ANC failed to implement legal measures to protect landowners and farm owners from such attacks. However, it seemed that nobody really had any clue what the true motive of the crime could be, as rumors were rife, because The majority of South Africans thought to themselves at the time that this could have been done by someone very close to the Steenkamps. And as it was marketed as a farm murder, right, this could have been done by someone who wanted to take the farming empire and everything in relation to that. Now, what the country did agree on was the fact that they felt very sorry for Don. He survived, whereas his parents and sister couldn't. And the Steenkamps and Griekwastad as a whole prepared for the funerals of Dion, Christel, and Mafela, while the entire country prayed for the family, prayed for the community, and for Don, especially during this very tragic time. On Thursday, the 12th of April 2012, the funerals of Dion, Christel, and Matella proceeded at the Dutch Reformers Church in Griekwastad. Now, due to the extensive coverage that the case had been getting since it first broke, the entire church was packed with the family, mourning community members, and journalists with their film crews. Students and parent representatives from Don and Mafela schools were on their way from Bloemfontein to Griekwastad to attend the funeral. However, there were strikes going on over service delivery. Another classic ANC fuck up. So yeah, there were strikes going on over service delivery, blocking the N1 highway connecting Bloemfontein and Griekwastad. Therefore, the students and parents representing Don's school, Grey College, decided to turn back to Bloemfontein and not attend the funeral. However, the students and teachers representing Matela's school, Oranje High School, were determined to make it to the funeral. Thus, they managed to drive past the traffic, and when they were 10 kilometers away from Griekwastad, the bus that they were traveling on had its wheels burst. So they were now stuck in the middle of the road, and yet they were so close to their destination. The Oranje representatives could have just easily given up and made plans to go back, like what Grey College did. But they didn't, because all the students and parents part of the convoy knew and loved Matela like one of their own. And they were determined to make it to her funeral in any way they can. Girl power! Woo! Hey, by the way, it was International Women's Day not so long ago, so happy belated International Women's Day, because there's one thing about women, they sure know how to persevere. So, big ups to them. Girl power. Woohoo! Eventually, they warned the Steenkamps that they were going to be late for the funeral, and they managed to flag down a police van. And after being granted permission, the 9 representatives from Matela's school got into the back of the police van and were escorted to the funeral in Griekwastad. They covered the last 10 kilometers, and they managed to get to the church in time to pay their final tearful condolences to their friend and colleague. This video is online of Oranje students in tears, and I mean deadass, they're in tears, because they've had a memorial assembly dedicated to Matela's memory. Because Matela was so beloved by her family, friends, teachers, and community around her. And they were all deeply traumatized because one of their own, a 14-year-old girl, had a whole promising life that was ahead of her, and yet it was cruelly taken away from her. Obviously, Don was at the funeral. He was sitting in between his maternal and paternal grandmothers. And there's footage of the funeral online, which you can check out at your own time. And at some point, the cameras zoom in on Don as he looks like he's been crying during the funeral. His cheeks are quite red. His eyelids look teary. And he was sitting in a hunched position. He bowed his head quite a lot during the funeral as well. However, one key thing to note was that despite all of that, Don didn't shed any tears at all. None at all whatsoever during the funeral procession. which is weird for someone to have when they're mourning the loss of a family member. In his case, 3. He tried, but it looked more futile with each attempt. Yet the community and the church felt sorry for him because they felt that the way he was processing the deaths of his family members was only natural. You mean the theatrics or the act that no tears were actually shed? Come on. Anyway, Dion, Christelle, and Martella were cremated after the funeral instead of being buried in the Steenkamp family cemetery. Probably because of the way that their bodies were injured and bruised during the shooting. Now, after the funeral, Don, who was under the care of Paul Boffa, a neighbor, and Dion and Christelle's appointed legal guardian in the event they die, moved from the Boffa's farm to Benny Heggroot's farm. Benny Heggroot's farm. Because the Boffas were not mentally ready to look after him yet, according to Jacques Steenkamp's book. Plus, one of Boffa's daughters was teased at school relentlessly for even knowing Don. So Heggroot decided, you know what, I'm going to take one for the team and assist Boffa by housing Don with my wife, Hanley, and my children. Now, who's Benny Heggroot? Well, he's Don's tent pegging coach, and he was also a very good friend of Dion because remember, they coached the same sport together and they introduced their families to each other. So Heggroot became Don's permanent legal guardian as Don decided to make his way back to Great College the week after the funerals. Now, you'd expect someone like Don, who just lost his family, to continue grieving and to be very closed off and quiet, or at the very least, try to get some help to process his grief and how sad he is at the thought of, his family dead. Well, you could probably guess what happened. None of it happened at all. The exact opposite, however, did. Remember when I said that between Don and Martella, Don was the quieter, more reserved sibling? Well, since the murders occurred, he suddenly had a personality boost. He wasn't the shy, quiet boy people thought of anymore. He was becoming more extroverted. He started making more jokes than usual. And he seemed to be very happy for someone who just lost his family to a significant tragedy. And due to the sympathetic attention that Don got from the entire country, many girls started to warm to him now. And he was essentially becoming a chick magnet. Something which Don, pre-murders, wasn't, because the guy had no riz. He was quiet as hell. But now, because everyone is feeling sorry for him, he's out there flirting with girls, and he reveled in it. It's as if Don's parents and sister dying, was a huge weight lifted off his shoulders, because for the most part, he carried on with life as if nothing happened. This is incredibly suspicious if you ask me. Feeling happier now that your family's dead? I mean, I get it if they were abusive to you, but Dion and Christelle were no such parents, because remember, they are tough, firm, but fair parents. Plus, everyone in Griekwastad loved them. So how do you feel so happy immediately after your parents and younger sister get shot and killed not too long ago? And it ain't just me and you guys was probably thinking, what the fuck is going on? Great college students and their parents were also concerned about Don's return to the school and his sudden personality change. And the main reason being was that they were deducting that Don could have possibly committed these murders due to the sudden shift in his behavior, and it got to the point where rumors about his possible involvement were flying around the school via text messages. And it got to the principal, who was now stuck between a rock and a hard place with these two options, which I'm going to elaborate. He was stuck between allowing Don to continue to pursue his education at Great College, despite the increasing uncomfortability of the school's students, and possibly lose some learners who paid thousands of rands for their child's education. Because I checked out Gray's fees online. These guys pay about 45 or so 48,000 rand every school term. So that's roughly like 37,000 something here in Botswana. Like, that's mal. So there's that option. The other option was to release Don from Grey College permanently and face the wrath of his family, as they believe that he isn't in any way the police's main suspect. So then why should he be treated as a murderer if he's not the main suspect that the police and everyone else are looking out for? So therefore the principal chose the latter. He tried his hardest to keep the whole scandal of Don's return hidden under Grey College's rugs. However, things would remain so quiet for that long, because now the police were still continuing their investigations, right? And they had to sift through multitudes of rumors. And despite everyone in Griekwastad agreeing that the Steenkamps were the perfect, unassuming family to the community, let's not forget, this is a small town where tongues wag faster than the Kardashians passionately arguing over a missing nail clip and mascara on TV. Some of the rumors indicate that Dion was responsible for killing his wife and daughter and spared Don before taking his own life. While there was another rumor going around that Martella was involved in a suicide pact. Yeah, you heard me correctly. A whole suicide pact between herself and her friends at Oranje High School, and had apparently sent BBMs. Remember BBMs? The most obsolete messaging service ever, from like the most obsolete tech company ever. BlackBerry, that whole thing. So she sent BBMs to her friends stating that if she were to die, she'd rather die a quick death and would rather prefer to get shot as a result. However, upon further investigation of both those rumors, they were just nothing more but malarkey. They were just false. And I'd imagine that the rumors surrounding the investigation was seriously hurting the Steenkamps more than the news of Dion, Christelle, and Matella's deaths and their subsequent funerals. Because to put it simply, the right to privacy to properly grieve and process these murders were taken away the minute the media got involved. The effect of these deaths also became physical for the family, because remember, Don Sr., who was increasingly becoming more and more frail, right, prior to the death of his son and his family, he suffered 2 strokes and survived. That's just beyond awful, because the son he wanted for a long time was dead, and he lost him before his time. It isn't right, because no parent should ever face the reality of having to bury their own child. Now back to the media. Every major newspaper in South Africa was reporting on the story. The whole family had gotten involved in some of these articles because there was something that was just so sensationalistic about this case, right? A 15-year-old white boy, grade 10 student at one of the most prestigious boys' colleges in the country, is the sole survivor of a terrible incident which claimed 3 lives that he knew and loves deeply, that being his parents and younger sister. And it could have been done by someone who was a disgruntled colored farm worker with a racially motivated motive. But there was no such, because the Steenkamps were not they were not difficult, they were not abusive employees to their employees. And the employees were more scared about their livelihoods being taken away as a result of these murders. So that option really doesn't really hold a lot of water. Therefore, could this be committed by someone close to the family? Perhaps Don himself. Oh, speaking of Don, the police started to look at him a lot more, because Diwal had this nagging feeling that something about Don just ain't right. Something wasn't sitting well with him. If he was the only survivor, he'd be suffering a very extreme case of survivor's guilt. Should it be me? All of that. But as you can already gather, Don did not feel anything emotional. Nothing at all in regards to his parents and his sister's murder. Plus, when Diwal was escorting Don to the police station in the immediate aftermath of the murders, Don asked Diwal what he should do to inherit everything. And Diwal was taken aback at first, but upon further investigation, He discovered that Dion and Christelle set up 2 trust funds prior to their deaths. The Nawak Trust Fund for Don and the Edelweiss Trust Fund for Martella, which was named after her horse that Martella adored and used for her tent pegging competitions. As Don is the sole immediate family member alive, he will be the recipient of both these trusts by the time he turns 21, and thus these trusts would be managed by Don Sr., Don's grandfather from his dad's side, until he turned 21, because remember, he was 15, he's still a minor. And both these trusts were valued at an astonishing 20 million rand in 2012. So currently that's just over like 37 million rand, which converted into Pula is 27 million Pula. So you see why Malema's out there looking like a political Spider-Man with a beret saying, "Bring back the land! Bring back the land! We want the land back from the white people! Dubula Ibue!" Because you see, as part of those trust funds, Don would stand to inherit all of the farms his father owned prior to his death, and he would also inherit all of his parents' guns. Therefore, there is a significant financial motive to place Don at the scene of the crime and make him a possible suspect. However, things for Diwar and his team would only escalate when the pathologist came back with the autopsy results. Now, keep in mind that this specific part contains details of sexual assault. So if you are affected by recent or past sexual assault, the Botswana Gender-Based Violence Prevention and Support Center, Women Against Rape, and Childline Botswana's links in the episode description are all down below. Childline's numbers is also linked down below, so please do check them out. Now, the bodies of Dion, Christelle, and Martella Steenkamp underwent an autopsy by pathologist Dr. Lingwan Fuch, and the results of this autopsy were shocking. According to Dr. Fuch, Dion had been shot 3 times, once to his right shoulder, another to his left ear, and another more fatal shot to the back of his head. Christelle was shot twice. The first shot landed on her back, and the gunshot traveled through her abdomen. And the second shot that she received was also a fatal shot to the back of her head. Also, don't forget, Dion also experienced significant blunt force trauma to his head. And also, keep in mind this, the victim who suffered the most abuse was Martella. Because remember, she was beaten with a blunt object to her head, just like her father, which could possibly be the heel of the revolver used in the shootings. Dr. Fuch confirmed that detail, that Martella's head was indeed hit with a blunt force object, so possibly the heel of the revolver used to shoot her. And Dr. Fuch also confirmed that Martella was shot 4 times as well, twice to her chest, twice to her face. And there were different bullet cartridges in her body, which matched the rifle and the revolver Don supposedly found after the shootings. Now, this next bit is just absolutely traumatic. Upon further investigation on Martella's body, Dr. Fuch made a very troubling analysis. There was significant damage done to Martella's vagina, as it was bruised and had undergone vaginal damage internally. However, no semen was found anywhere near the vagina, but given that these were fresh bruises that Martella suffered within a 24 to 48 hour window prior to her death, Dr. Fuch gathered one possible outcome from this. Martella was raped prior to her death. Now, remember the gunshot residue tests that Don did in the immediate aftermath of, his parents' and sister's murder? Well, the gunshot residue test results came back, and they also provided very surprising news too. It was revealed that although there wasn't any gunshot residue found on Don's hands when he was tested, because remember, he cleaned all of the blood of himself, but on the torn rugby shirt that Don came to the police station wearing on the night of the murder, right? You remember that was taken alongside the bloody rugby shorts that he was wearing as well. Both of those were taken as forensic evidence, just typical police, safekeeping. And as a result, the gunshot residue test was also tested on the clothes that Don wore that night. And the results, do you want to do like a little... There was gunshot residue on the shirt that Don wore on the night of the murders. Because don't forget, gunshot residue isn't just restricted to your hands. You may be holding a gun, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's just only on your hand that gunshot residue is gonna really concentrate on. Because remember a little thing called gunpowder? That could also land on your clothes as well. And thus it could count for gunshot residue. So this only wrecked Don's version of events even further, because after significant DNA analysis of the crime scene, there was no foreign traces of DNA found in the Steenkamp house. None from the farm workers who lived there and worked there, or anyone else for that matter, had DNA matching what was found at the house. The clothes that Don wore the night were also heavily covered in Martella's DNA as well upon closer forensic investigation. All from the blood, all from Martella's blood, which was exposed all over the clothes. And the blood, mind you, was splattered all over his shirt. And also on his shorts as well. So this indicates that Don and Martella struggled for the revolver that was used, and Don hit Martella with the heel of the revolver in close contact. That, alongside the fact that his shirt was torn by its collar, possibly by Martella, and possibly leaving scratch marks. Remember, he had scratch marks on his neck, right? Possibly leaving scratch marks on Don's neck as a sign of a struggle between her and her older brother. So, Diwal looked at Don's version of events again, and after being granted access to the phones of Dion, Christelle, and Martella, right, he made another big discovery, because he realized that Don's story was just a whole complete lie. Because you see, according to Don, after he took the police on a little walkthrough of, what happened on the night and etc., he said that the murders of his family began at around 6 to 6:30, because he went to the barn, leaving his father and sister to watch TV, specifically this old Afrikaans sitcom called Witkoek, where all the characters of the show just basically sell witkoeks, or fat cakes in English. His mother was in the kitchen, possibly baking biscuits or something else in regards to her baking business. Whatever, we don't know. So Don was in the farm. Then once he heard the shots, he hid in the barn, went inside the house to try and save his sister before she died in his arms, on his baki, told the farm workers what happened, left the farm, but not before taking the guns that he found on the way and getting to the police station at 7 p.m. So, therefore, his timeline had an over 40-minute window. However, when Diwal granted access to Dion, Christelle, and Martella's phones, it was revealed that at 6:34, Christelle sent a text message to Martella. And it wasn't like a big, important message per se. It was just like where we're going to go for our family vacation next time and etc. Do you have any ideas? Blah, blah, blah. But the timing of this message is very important, as it had now dawned on Diwal and the police that Don's timeline did not match the timeline that he
stated, as they were developing that after this they were developing this idea that after this text message was sent, the murderer had only 20 minutes, not 40 like what Dion said, 20 minutes to go in, kill all 3 members of the surviving Steenkamp family, and get away with it. It was also theorized that Martella actually escaped outside. There were traces of her blood linked to this tree in her backyard, indicating that she was dragging herself from outside the back door, trying to get some help before being forced back inside by the intruder, and was further beaten and shot to death. And if Don claimed to hide in the barn and hear screaming in the house, he would have heard Martella's possible cries for help, and his sister in any way she can be spared, right? Wrong. Therefore, Don's version of events was a complete lie. And to top it all off, DeWall had begun digging closer into Don's life. He interviewed Don's friend who invited him to spend Christmas in the coast, the December holidays before the murders. Remember that guy? He tells DeWall that after the murders, Don texts him and says, I guess we can go to the coast now this Christmas. What? Your parents and your sister just got killed, and you're more concerned about a holiday trip? So after compiling all of this evidence together, it soon became clear to DeWall and his investigation team that due to the forensic evidence collected, witness statements, and story inconsistencies, Dion, Christelle, and Martella's murderer all seem to point at one person, Don Steenkamp, the apparent sole survivor. The motive being that initially he was becoming tired of his parents' insistence to pursue his education further before doing the same for his love for farming. Because remember, he wanted to drop out of Grey College and pursue farming full time. But Dion, Christelle, they were like, no, we're not doing that. Therefore, it created some tension in the house as a result, because Don wanted the freedom to do what he liked with who he liked, in reference to wanting to spend Christmas elsewhere. Plus, given his shy, reserved nature, Don wanted to explore his sexual interests, but he was severely sexually repressed, and thus he looked at his sister not in a brotherly way, but in a lustful, carnal one instead. Because remember, Martella was everything Don wasn't. Beautiful, extroverted, friendly, and studious. Thus, by raping his own sister, I can't believe I'm saying this, by raping his own sister, Don could finally get a taste of what he wanted. Sex. He didn't care that it was forced, or that he basically practiced incest, or that it was emotionally and physically scarring for his sister to go through this against her own will. He wanted to make the most of his erect penis towards someone who he was supposed to love and protect, because he is her older brother. One thing about rape is that it doesn't matter what you wear, what you look like, or if you know the person or not. It can happen to anyone, and the shock, confusion, and anger will remain with the victim forever. They'll find healthier ways of managing it in ECC, but all of that is life-changing. I will kill anyone that harms my younger sister, cousins, nieces, or friends, despite the fact that my sister and some of my cousins individually annoy me. I mean, they're younger, of course. But I wouldn't mind going to jail for them, as long as they're safe. And as an older brother, I expected Don to do the same because how are we going to be able to tackle the rising issues of rape, insult culture, domestic violence, and really as a whole, gender-based violence? If such crimes continue to persist, especially by those closest to the victim, then that's just going to create a really big disaster. Anyway, sorry for going on this tangent, but you get where I'm coming from, right? Anyway, after she was raped by her own brother, Martella would have threatened to tell their parents the entire truth. And the coward growing inside Don really thought, good idea to not face the proper consequences of my actions. And instead beat into it by shooting her and my parents before they could ever find out what me, the precious eldest son, did to their precious beloved daughter. All because he wants to inherit everything and live the life that he thought he could easily get. This case is infuriating. Literally infuriating, because Don did not really care about the lives of his parents or his sister. He just wanted to play God. And he did so, thinking, I'm gonna get away with it. I wouldn't be taking off so much if it weren't for you, man. So, Don Steenkamp raped his sister before killing her and their parents. All possibly because he wanted more freedom, a farming fortune all to himself, and to have female sexual validation from his own sister? The question now remains, will Don get away with this, or will Diwal, the police, and the extremely broken South African judicial system get to him before it's too late? Find out next time on Dragon Ball Z. Okay, I'm kidding. But this is the end of part 1. Part 2 of the Griekwastad murders will be coming out on Wednesday the 26th of March at the same time of 7 p.m. on Spotify and YouTube. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this episode, comment below, share, like, and follow CrimeBrew on Spotify and YouTube again. And also follow CrimeBrew's Instagram and TikTok pages, along with my personal Instagram, which I'll link below. Yet again, don't forget that part 2 will be out next Wednesday, 7 p.m. on all the aforementioned streaming services, Spotify and YouTube. But until then, continue brewing your cups of tea, Bahaito, and I'll see you next week for part 2 of The Perfect Family, the Griekwastad murders on CrimeBrew with Kgosi Tau-Bantsi.